Good afternoon and welcome to the 2021 Oregon Active Transportation Summit. My name is Maddie Carlson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Engagement and Events Assistant with the Street Trust. Before we begin our program, the Street Trust would like to acknowledge the land we are occupying. The Portland metro area rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land. Thank you. Welcome to What Does Abolition Look Like on Public Transit? Your presenter for this session is Lee Helfend. You can type your questions in the chat or use the raise hand tool, both found at the bottom of your screen, or unmute and ask them. Please use the social media tag OATS21 to post about the summit on social media. And don't forget to visit our website at thestreettrust.org to learn more about our other programs and activities, including SB 395, AKA Safe Routes for All, an update to the historic bike bill on its 50th anniversary that the Street Trust is championing in the Oregon legislature this session. To claim AICP credit for attending this session, please log into the OATS Schedule platform and find the AICP certificate download link near the top of the page. Now, without further delay, please welcome to your screen, Lee Helfend.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maddie, for that introduction and that land acknowledgement. I'm super excited to be here today. Once again, my name is Lee Helfend and I use they, them pronouns. I currently work with OPAL Environmental Justice Oregon as the organizing director. For those of you who might not be aware, OPAL is situated in Southeast Portland. And although we primarily do environmental justice work in and around the Portland area, we also do a ton of advocacy work statewide as well. We are a membership-based organization, which means that we are constantly in community. We organize folks on the buses through the Bus Riders Union, Bus Riders Unite, and then we also work with the Youth Environmental Justice Alliance, which helps advocate for different positions such as Youth Pass, which you may have heard of, advocating for access and equity on transit. I am super excited to have you all here today. And I just want to quickly ground us in a definition for what abolition is and how we're going to be using that term today. It's specifically in reference to police and prison abolition. And of course, we'll be talking about how that intersects with transit and also environmental justice movements. When we think about abolition, I'm hoping that by the time this presentation is over, if you're not entirely familiar with the concept, we're thinking about ways that we can divest from police and prisons and all of the harmful institutions that surround that institution within our society and move towards community-centered models of care and ways of really showing up for each other that are nonviolent. This presentation was created this past year in part as a response to the uprisings with the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd, but also Bus Riders Unite and Asia have been doing a ton of abolition work for a very long time. We've been advocating for reductions in transit fares, going fareless as Portland metro region, and then also thinking about how we can really move those resources in a broader way away from policing at prisons. So our members have been doing a ton of advocacy around this for a long time. And I'll first jump into asking y'all, what is care? What does this look like for you? How does care show up in your everyday life? And how do you express care to people in your most immediate circles? I am going to be asking for lots of participation, so I'm hoping to hear from everyone before the hour is over, which would be super amazing. And the questions only get more engaged, so if you're someone who doesn't like to speak, that's totally fine, but this is also an easy way to enter the conversation. And as you introduce yourself, if you wouldn't mind saying your name, your pronouns, and potentially what organization you're with as well.
I think we're few enough people. If you want to unmute and just start talking, and if someone's already talking, hold back or type into the chat.
Hi, this is How Hagedorn, she, her. I'm with Portland State University. And as you were talking about what care means, I think especially as it pertains to public spaces, I'm reminded of just if you see something, say something, like the bystander perspective of care. So to me, like that is what comes to mind when you ask what is care, among other things.
Absolutely. I love the community-minded approach when we're thinking about this topic. Maybe we can hear from one or two more folks just to kind of ground us in this discussion a little bit.
Hi, I'm Kathy Fitzpatrick. I work as mobility manager in the Columbia Gorge by state region, and I help to coordinate public transportation. And for me, and my pronouns are she, her. For me, care means, for me, when I think of my professional life, care means showing up, and then not just showing up, but making sure that I am listening deeply, and that I am, and that I'm acting, that I'm doing everything I can to eliminate barriers for people to get on transit and to use transit, to really make sure that things are happening.
Absolutely. I loved mentioning deep listening. I think, you know, we all express care in so many different ways throughout the day. And we're going to be talking about some really large institutions and how we want those to be changed and affected. But first and foremost, this is just a question of how we interact with each other in sometimes even the smallest of ways. So thank you for bringing that into the space. And maybe we can do one more person if there's a volunteer out there. Okay, that's totally fine as well. We'll have some other opportunities to engage later throughout the presentation. But thank you to the two folks who decided to share. I first also want us to talk about this concept of US exceptionalism. We often hear, you know, this phrase American exceptionalism thrown around, and it's this kind of mythos around how the country operates and how we're supposed to be internationally seen as a country that upholds values that can be shared and spread throughout the world. That's kind of the mythos that surrounds it. But I want to also make sure that we just understand that one of the ways that we have the most exceptionalism is really through our prisons and our policing system. The way that it operates in our country is not seen throughout the world, and really looks quite different than anything else we've seen throughout history as well. We need to ground ourselves and really root ourselves in our exceptional history with slavery. And, sometimes folks will bring into this space that other countries have used slaves as well, but we have a particular violence in the United States around the institution of slavery that even persists to today. So that's really important for us to understand that this country is exceptional in some extremely violent ways. And then also with the specific history of the Pacific Northwest and Oregon, we know that as a state, we have been not only exclusionary of specifically Black folks and other people of color as a state, but we've also enacted a lot of harm in terms of genocide against Indigenous folks on this land, and anti-immigration laws, and a lot of other ways that as a state we have contributed to a culture and a country rooted in violence. We also know that over the past few years, there's been a lot of notice of militia groups, of white supremacist groups, of other white nationalist groups really rising up. And so we might think of like the Proud Boys, for example, but we also just have to understand that within the Portland area, something that is widely known is how concepts such as white fragility play out in the space, and also how that contributes to a larger culture of white supremacy to this day. We saw, of course, the Black Lives Matter movements over the past decade or so really rising up nationally and internationally in response to this. And we are no exception here in the Portland area. And as a country, we have really been most deeply rooted in the violence that has been perpetuated since genocide and slavery as well. When we're talking about prisons and policing, we need to also understand that this is a system which perpetuates a class difference, especially for Black and Brown folks and other marginalized identities and communities, to really create an underclass of folks that support a larger system of white supremacist capitalism. So I would love a few volunteers. Let's think 4 or 5. This should be pretty straightforward, but if you wouldn't mind shouting out who profits from prisons, who profits from incarceration, surveillance, police states, and the wage theft of currently imprisoned folks. So just feel free to shout out who comes to mind and who profits from a system of prisons and policing.
Corporations that staff and supply prisons and detention centers and carceral facilities, or who use folks in prison for carceral labor.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you for jumping in there. And if folks wouldn't mind also saying their name, their pronouns, and if you would like to what organization you're with, and feel free to continue contributing to who profits from prisons and policing.
And just following up on my comment, sorry for not identifying myself, Talia Jacobson, she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm with Tool Design.
Awesome, thank you.
Lee, this is Kathy with MCED. And there's I don't think are you able to see the chat, because there are a lot of answers in the chat that I can read out if you want me to.
That would be great. I cannot see the chat, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just went through that myself this morning. So we've got friends of politicians. We have private corporations, CEOs, shareholders, couple of corporations, couple of answers with corporations in them. And wealthy folks, especially wealthy white men, the private prison industry, and the many private and public institutions that use prison labor, federal congressional districts with prisons in them, hospitals. Oregon State Penitentiary has the largest laundry facility west of the Mississippi that does hospital linens. State universities, dorm furniture built by inmates at very low pay rates, on the order of about $1 an hour. Karina Kimball Brown. Oh, I'm sorry. That was just somebody saying who that was. And I might have missed somebody, but that's what I've been able to read so far.
Yeah, thank you for reading out the chat. And those are great answers, everyone. I'm just going to go ahead and jump into this next slide, which speaks exactly to a lot of the different areas that y'all were naming. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There are so many people who are profiting from prisons and policing. And if we also think about how, this just enters our everyday life, we think about surveillance culture, how people have, access to cameras, and how people might be putting bars on their windows, or contracting out with security forces for events. Just lots of different ways. We have to, of course, mention the police unions and their role in all of this. In a past meeting, when I was giving this presentation, movies were brought up, and how movies coordinate with larger federal forces in order to create this narrative around how police are amazing and great and there to help our communities. So the movie industry is also part of this. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and of course the military. The military and police are really one and the same. They go hand in hand. So that's of course worth a mention as well. But thank you all for those contributions. And if in future slides where I'm asking for that participation, if folks wouldn't mind helping out by just reading some of those responses as well, that would be great.
Yeah, this is Maddie, your MC. I'll be reading all of the responses from the chat going forward. Sorry about missed questions in this one if we missed a few. That won't happen again.
Oh, no worries. Thanks so much, Maddie. I really appreciate that. And I do want to kind of tie us into our main topic for this presentation, which is, how is this a TriMet problem? How do these kind of larger ideas connect to our local transit system, and what does it look like every day on the ground? What are folks actually experiencing? So we know that in public spaces, marginalized folks, Black and brown folks, Muslims, queer and trans folks are all more likely to be targeted, and of course, low income and houseless folks. We know that these communities are often more likely to use transit in the first place, and that creates this dynamic where by policing transit, we are more likely to be policing already marginalized communities, and that this creates more opportunity through fair enforcement and discrimination and unfair targeting practices. This creates more opportunities for folks to enter the carceral system. So if someone, for example, can't pay for the fare, but decides to ride anyway, and then gets targeted by a fare enforcer or police, we know that a bystander, cannot ask to pay that fare and have the whole situation be absolved. This is really an opportunity for like the carceral system to step in, and that's actually one of the points for why this kind of oversight and policing is happening in areas where marginalized folks are already more likely to frequent. This also looks like contracting with private security forces. And recently, the intergovernmental agreement between the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office and TriMet was successfully passed. Although we're doing advocacy around having community oversights of this contract, it was for nearly $100 million over a 7-year time period, in which this contract is going to uphold that enforcement that's already taking place. And a lot of public money is being moved towards this policing. There's also, of course, the transit jail, which happened not too long ago. And this is kind of in the same vein that you all were mentioning in the chat, an opportunity to really move resources to other contractors and folks who have a very large investment in making sure that those resources are moved out of our communities and towards policing and other capitalist forces. I'll pause there real quick, just in case there is anything coming up in the chat, or if anyone wants to chime in maybe about a personal experience they've had on TriMet with some of this policing or enforcement that's happening.
I'll read a question we missed from earlier. Let me scroll up to it. From Peter Fry. Sorry that we missed this earlier, Peter. With respect, so this is for your previous question for who profits. The violence that is, I think that's what it was in regards to. Sorry if I'm wrong, Peter. The violence that is and that has and continues to occur throughout the world is extreme. At this moment, hundreds, if not thousands, are being executed and enslaved throughout the world. Slavery is common now in other countries. In no way does this forgive the US. We need to have an accurate understanding. Only in the US are these issues openly discussed. In other countries, the issues are submerged with violence and intimidation. If I missed anyone else's comments, you can send me a direct message so I can scroll up to them too. It's kind of hard to keep track of the ones that are up the scroll, but going forward, we'll get them all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maddie. And speaking to that point, I love how you were able to bring in how this is taking place internationally. And there's a really important connection to be made there around how US imperialism and military forces work with police within the United States and other forces throughout the world to continue this cycle of violence. So thank you for naming that as well. So I'm gonna move us forward to the question of why abolition, and just to really bring us back to this definition of abolition in the first place. Abolition is specifically in this context talking about prison and police abolition, and has a direct connection in movements against slave abolition, and really drawing the parallels between how policing and prisons are used to continue those same kind of anti-Black forces used at the founding of this country. And then also just acknowledging that police as an institution were specifically designed to hunt Black folks especially, and that white supremacist groups have run policing departments. I know that This is something I learned a lot more about when I was living in Louisiana, and how folks connected to the KKK were just, you know, getting jobs in police, and that they had folks in there who were hiring other folks associated with the KKK and white supremacist movements. And that's something that has happened for a very long time. That's nothing new. And so really drawing that connection. And then this concept of abolition is a framework, a roadmap, and helps us identify the steps we need to take towards a very specific goal and outcome. So this helps us kind of like stay focused when we think about the world that we want to live in, and how we can imagine this world to be different. This concept of abolition is really useful in making sure we're on track and that we're rejecting reformism. A quote that I always remember is from Professor Angela Davis, who said that we got here to this state of current violence through a series of reforms that have completely failed. Things continue to get worse, and all of these reforms, such as, like, you know, trainings and like I mentioned, a community oversight board, that these are all ways in which, you know, we are kind of kept in this bureaucratic system, and that we really aren't taking the steps we need towards breaking these cycles of violence. And that's not to say that we, you know, we don't need trainings and community oversight boards, and that that's not really important work that needs to happen. We just want that to happen in a different context, not connected to policing and prisons. This also means that we're moving resources towards other models of communities of care. And so this is something Bus Riders Unite and other coalition groups have really been advocating for, is just making sure that if we're having houseless folks on the transit system, that they're not experiencing harassment. We're actually able to think about how we can connect folks to resources, and really use that as a space to question why we have such a big issue around houselessness in the first place. And it also can help us craft policies and think about other ways that we can support each other as a community. So really just connecting back to the question that we started of how care looks like in our communities, and what we really want that to look like. And I do want to take a second to really pause here and see if these are new concepts for folks, if any of these topics are particularly difficult, or maybe you're even confronting some long-held beliefs that you've had around police and prisons. So I'll just kind of open up the space, and if anything is coming up in the chat, or if folks want to unmute and shout it out, I definitely welcome that.
No one in the chat yet, but please, folks, feel free to unmute or type in the chat, and I'll read aloud so Lee can see everything too.
Yeah, and if you have things that you're seeing in your own communities, please feel free to share out and bring that to the larger space. I think this is also an important time for us to share resources and to share potential solutions to these problems as well.
Okay, hi, a comment from Emma Newman. She, her, City of Springfield. Emma would love to hear more about models of care that work well to serve community needs, such as CAHOOTS in the Eugene Springfield area.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something we are exploring at OPAL and with Bus Riders Unite. We currently have researchers that we're working with to explore that question, and we have looked at CAHOOTS as well, which, as far as my understanding goes, does partner with local police forces, and they are called out if there's a chance for intervention outside of policing, such as like a social worker or a behavioral health care model, where folks can actually address the issues that are happening without the need for police intervention. One critique I've heard of that is just that, there is still coordination with police that are happening. And so this is not to knock on the program. I think it's shown a lot of folks that there are ways to explore alternatives that make sense for our communities. And also with an abolitionist framework, the question remains, how do we divorce the deployment of resources and labor without necessarily needing the coordination of policing in the first place? So that's a really great question, and something our researchers are running into is that there's actually not a ton of great models. We know of like the Guardian Angels in New York, but there have also been some wide critiques of that program, and we're trying to really find internationally if there are better models. We know a lot of folks are doing work on transit policing in LA, and are running into a lot of the same problems that we're facing here in the Portland metro area. So I think from what we've found based on our research, we have just a really long way to go to make sure we're centering transit policing as an important part of the larger abolitionist movement that's happening across the United States and in other parts of the world. And also we are trying to learn actively as we confront this question, what this can look like that makes sense for our own areas as well. It looks like there might be another chat coming in as well.
That was just me welcoming new attendees. Don't be shy, please participate.
But yeah, that's a great question. We really want to make sure when we're talking to like elected officials and other community leaders that we have a lot of research to demonstrate that not only is this possible, but it makes a lot more sense for our communities. So working with other folks in other areas on the ground doing the same type of work has been a really important part of our practice, and also something we want to continue to do and explore.
Lee, this is Kathy, and I've got a question about, and I can't remember which House bill it is, but you may have mentioned it. I'm not sure if you said that it actually passed, but it is regarding policing, TriMet being able to do more policing and targeting people who are trying to take shelter on their light rail and bus system. And I'm just wondering what OPAL is doing to how OPAL is countering that. I know that just like CTA and W, some of the community transit associations are really looking at that closely with some anxiety and fear like what that actually means, if that does pass or has passed?
Yeah, great question. If you're talking about House Bill 2482, that very recently did not move out of committee and will not be moving forward. I know from what I heard from transit agencies that there was concern around the bill, if it was passed, that they wouldn't be able to essentially like remove people from the transit system who were creating issues. And I think that kind of sidesteps the larger point of the bill, which is, to reduce like these violent instances, and specifically talking about not having police be fair enforcers, which is something we know TriMet has agreed with, although they are still in opposition to the bill and actively lobbied against it. And that's not to say, that in community spaces that sometimes people don't create problems or use the system in ways that maybe wasn't originally designed for, but I think speaks to the larger problem of the fact that our communities are under-resourced. We actually don't have great ways to always address the myriad of needs that arise in public spaces. That's not exclusive to transit. We need to know how to care for folks who are houseless. We need to know how to care for folks who are experiencing mental health crises, or who have other health issues. And it shouldn't necessarily be on the operators of these transit systems to have to address all of these issues while also like keeping control of the bus, for example. And that's why we would love to have more presence on the system that is not police. I think a lot of our community members have called for increased presence, which could look like resource officers or rider ambassadors. We used to have rider advocates in a region of Portland that did a great job of promoting pro-social behavior and also connecting folks to resources. And so we're currently exploring what bringing that program could look like within, a larger region, hopefully all of Portland eventually. But also, like, I totally understand that operators, don't want to have to be responsible for all of these things and are often overworked and underappreciated. We are definitely in alignment with ATU and the workers themselves in these discussions. And we know that we could be doing a better job moving community resources towards a presence that is based in care, kind of once again, where we started the discussion. We need folks who are well-trained. We need folks who know how to de-escalate situations, connect folks to resources. We need folks who are able to address a wide range of issues from a wide, from a community that is from a ton of different backgrounds. And that's hard, and that takes time, and that takes a real commitment. At the same time, it doesn't make sense that, folks in the community are being harassed. I think we often speak from a place of privilege when we say, well, what are we supposed to do with people who have a different life experience than us, who are, maybe they're causing problems, maybe they're not, maybe they're just having a hard day. And we have to really just, I think, humble ourselves in how we approach these discussions and say that there are, bigger forces at play here that we are all responsible for as members of the community.
I'm going to read a chat comment that came in a little bit ago from Emma Newman again. She listened to a webinar that she believes shared examples from the Bay Area in which they've provided housing and mental health services at transit centers. It would be interesting to see this explored more in Oregon.
Yes, we have definitely been looking at the Bay Area, and I am in total alignment with that. I think that would be amazing. And I think I see a hand raised in the participant section.
Yeah, go ahead and
Hi.
unmute.
Yes, hi, this is Talia Jacobson again, she, her, hers. One of the things that I am really interested in is where we can have people who staff transit vehicles whose role is both to, intervene in situations where someone else might otherwise be inclined to call police, but who can also increase the accessibility of the transit network to people with different needs. I come from the perspective of being someone who has an autistic younger brother whose verbal and physical behavior may look unusual to other people. And, pretty much since he started looking like an adult, my parents and I always had to be conscious of how other people react to him in public space. And I've definitely, as a lifetime transit user, I've definitely been in situations where someone who's neurodivergent is behaving in an unusual way on transit, and I will see the operators or other riders react with discomfort. And I'm curious if there are any examples nationally or internationally of systems that use transit ambassadors to support people with cognitive or communication disabilities in making their trips successfully, while also diffusing potential conflicts with riders who may not be familiar with those kinds of behaviors.
Yeah, thank you for bringing your personal experience and just that ability, disability justice lens into this space. I think that is so important when we think about policing in prisons, and an often overlooked part of the conversation as well. I'm not familiar with any sort of service that might do that. If anyone else here today is familiar of with an example of that, I would definitely welcome sharing that out. And I would love to see that here in our own state as well. And as we continue to do research, I'm happy to stay connected. If folks want to reach out after the presentation as well, I would love to engage community members in this conversation. So I'm definitely, I'm here in Portland, definitely accessible.
Lee, this is Maddie. I've just put your email address in the chat for everyone.
Awesome, thanks, Maddie.
This is Corinna Kimball Brown. I just had a thought about sort of examples of ambassadors. I don't know if they're actually doing this, but a lot of cities have started thinking about their major transit stations with like the mobility hub concept, which includes different kinds of services. And so that's sort of one umbrella under which some places are offering like social services at transit stations. And also I know like LA is planning to staff their mobility hubs with transit ambassadors who might do some of the things that were mentioned. But yeah, I don't know that that's actually been implemented yet.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, as we continue to explore some of these other options, definitely feel free to reach out if folks know of any alternatives.
Well, I think a great example right now of that type of thing is what's happening with the vaccine rollout, because so many transit agencies are hosting vaccine clinics, large-scale vaccine clinics at their transit agencies, and that's happening all over the country and in Washington state as well, or else they are creating smaller, in the more rural areas, creating smaller hubs that but that is really, you know, transit centered, but then offering the vaccine services, you know, kind of that wraparound service, which I think has been really interesting to see that happen in just a short few months.
And one more link in the chat from Armando Zalata, not in America, but in the UK. It's a link to bus passes for autistic adults.
Okay, I had not heard about that. That is amazing though. Thank you for sharing that, Armando. And kind of just continuing the discussion, with OPAL and Bus Riders Unite, we currently have a grassroots safety table where we're bringing in partners interested in this discussion to really not only work in coalition, but think in a more long-term way about how we can move resources. Often in organizing, we're forced to be reactive to things that are on fire or happening immediately in the community. And the space is really a chance for us to come together on a regular basis to think about a myriad of different ways that we can roll out the changes we've discussed today. And if there's nothing else in the chats, I have a long list of resources, some of them related directly to transit and others related more broadly to abolitionist and defunding movements. And I'm happy to send those out once we're done here today if folks are interested. There's a bunch of great resources out there at all different levels, including locally and here at the state level as well. But if there's nothing else in the chats, that's, I think, all I got for you today. Thank you so much for attending, everyone. Thank you for those who were able to participate and provide some more context and questions and solutions. And once again, I'm happy to continue the discussion. We are just going to continue to do this work and this outreach and this research. And my call for you all is just to bring this conversation into the many different spaces that we all occupy and really just continue to center abolition in transportation justice and environmental justice movements. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you also to our sponsors who are listed on the Schedule conference website. And thank you attendees for coming. I would like to invite everyone to close out the 2021 Active Transportation Summit in style in our next session with Portland's most outrageous drag personality, Poison Waters. You can join us for a fun-filled hour of hilarity and hijinks as we play bingo. That is starting at 2, and you can find the link opening right now in Schedule. I'll leave this open for a sec if anyone wants to put any last minute things in the chat or unmute. We can share links of the resources in the Schedule website that will still be there. That's a good way to find your way to your session and find those links. Or also you've got Lee's email address in the chat and you can email Lee directly.
Hi, Lee, this is Sarah from Oregon State University. And I don't really know how to frame this question, but I'd love your input. So back when ICE was starting to amp up its efforts to remove people from the US, I was hearing in the news from different police organizations about their dismay around that and how they had spent a lot of resources and energy and time and effort to build trust with communities that housed a lot of undocumented folks in the United States, particularly to be able to respond to their needs for protection from violent crimes. And so I'm wondering, as we remove police, which I agree so much with what you're talking about today, how can we also consider the safety of folks who are more vulnerable and less likely to access protective help when they need it? Does that make sense?
Are you asking about people who, for example, might call the police when there is an incident?
Yes and no. I'm thinking of folks who are less likely to call the police when they have a really important need for safety and or some sort of supportive response to their need for safety. And so I'm trying to imagine a different entity to call in that instance, I guess, is where I'm going in my mind. I can't imagine it. So I'm wondering if you have resources around that.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I know that's something a lot of community members are asking in this moment, who are on board to really divest from policing and also are just wondering what an alternative could really look like. And I'll first say that there is a ton of documentation, and some of the resources for this presentation will speak to the fact that when police are called, they often perpetuate more violence, even against the person who asked them to show up on the scene. So I think that's just something we always have to remember, is that it can be almost like an automatic response to call the police, because they are, seen as someone who can create safety. That's like the broad narrative that exists in society. And for folks in a lot of different communities that I'm a part of, we also understand that there's a really good chance the police will beat or kill you or enter you into a system, a pipeline of incarceration, even if you were the one who made the call in the first place. So I think that's just really important to ground ourselves in. But I've seen a ton of amazing resources floating around, mostly on social media, about folks who are answering that question of like, who do you call? There's a lot of different resources available for housing, mental health, other moments of crisis that are taking place. I think the reality is that while some of these alternatives already exist in our communities, they are just drastically underfunded, and the public messaging from elected leaders and community leaders about who to call in case of an emergency needs to drastically shift from 911 towards some of these community resources that already are in place. I think your question, though, speaks to kind of a larger coordination between those resources. If we call 911, are we going to have someone who can dispatch us to those more appropriate responses? So I think that while we do need to reimagine, we also just need to think about some sort of like triaging that happens, because in a moment of panic, it's often difficult, even if you are aware of resources, to know where to go most immediately. But I think hopefully that addresses your question. I think the most apt response is just that, like, hopefully in the next year, in the next decade, in the next century, we can continue to just ask that same question and build out responses that are accessible for everyone. But thank you for asking that question. Yeah.
I just want to point out, I'm not on camera, but I'm nodding along as you're talking. Thank you so much for those thoughts.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I wish we had more time. I'm thinking of like personal experiences where, you know, community members were really in moments of need and didn't know where to go, but also knew that police were coordinating with white supremacists and other violent groups. And it's just really heartbreaking how crises can compound when we bring police into the situation.
One more from the chat for you, Lee, from Emma Newman. Thanks, Emma, for responding so much. I personally don't know how to engage in domestic partnership disputes when I see them. The frequency seems to be heightened during COVID due to increased stress and anxiety. And follows up more broadly, how to engage as a bystander or not in different situations.
Yeah, I wish I could really speak to that, I'm sure with the full scope that the topic deserves. I'm not aware of which resources would be most appropriate, especially I'm not sure which area you're coming out of. I think there's a serious consideration for intervention if you're witnessing something that you think might be wrong or something that's ongoing. Yeah, I would definitely just encourage continuing to outreach to community leaders in your area to see what their thoughts are on the subject. But that is a great question, and I know a lot of folks have spoken to the heightened domestic violence that's happening right now.
Okay, we are getting right to 2 p.m. The room doesn't kick us out at 2. So if there are any more questions or comments, please do unmute or put them in the chat. But if there aren't any more, I will end our meeting. So anyone who wants to get to the very last session of OATS, the bingo is available to do so.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks again, everyone. Thanks especially Lee. Thanks for making OATS such a wonderful summit this year. Goodbye.